Before going to bed, Penny and I would lie in bed reading. My wife, who I've been married to for 2 years, was reading a trashy romance novel. I was reading a hunting catalog. The kind with an unclothed Adonis on the front. His golden hair fluttering in the breeze as he held a huge, swollen-breasted woman. Penny broke the silence with a question that will forever be etched in my mind. What would you do if you found out I I didn't say anything? I just reached inside the nightstand, pulled out my P38 Special, and shot my wife in the eyes. The 16 by 24 glamour picture she got me as a birthday present last year was destroyed by the slug, and it also caused a hole in the vinyl siding that would need to be fixed. That little gun was loud without protection. I told Penny I put it politely, but the sheets were soiled. When she was ready to talk, she screamed, "Are you insane? Why did you do that?" She was still trembling, so I had to think carefully about how to answer. I said, "No, I am not insane. And I'm going to show you what will happen if you ever cheat on me. I'll shoot your pretty face, not your picture. First, though, I'd make you watch as I executed the cheating bastard who defiled our marriage. I give you my word on that. No more questions." We didn't snuggle that night. The next morning, there was broken glass. I rehung the picture, and we didn't bring it up again. I was a fool to think that would be enough to ensure fidelity. Fast forward 5 years. How I learned my wife was cheating is irrelevant. I knew for a fact that at 11 midnight, I came home at 11 to find my wife in bed with her boss, Roger Lamp, who was 57. 10. My heart was pounding for joy because the driveway was empty. I was hoping my suspicions would prove to be wrong. I needed to sneak inside to confirm that no one was home. Our house has a side garage, and I was able to pull into the driveway without being seen from the master bedroom suite. When I opened the service door, I almost threw up. Next to Penny's BMW was a strange black Mercedes. I understood my obligations. Breathing deeply, I loaded 6 high-velocity shells into my 12-gauge pump shotgun. These were loads of duck, capable of shooting steel more than 100 feet into the air. I emptied my magazine and opened the door. Penny had to have the Italian marble foyer floor. I saw her birthday present hanging from the banister. It was a set of lace panties and a bra that my wife had yet to wear for me. I crept up the circular staircase and heard them having sex in our marital bed. They were making guttural noises like two lovers who are beyond speaking. Then I heard the door open. I saw the lamp on the floor and I could see my wife screwing the guy. I waited until he straightened his back and then I went over to him from behind so Penny wouldn't see me. I wanted it to be a surprise. When he got a good rhythm going, I leveled my shotgun about 6 inches away from the base of his skull and pulled the trigger. Fire leapt from the barrel and 100 pellets flew out. The steel pellets tore through his head and his body gave 2 more thrusts. Then, to my amazement, he collapsed on Penny. It must have taken him some time to realize that his manhood would be suffering from severe blue balls for eternity as gray matter and bright crimson blood spurted all over her. She let out a single cry, stopped talking, and then passed out. I'd never assassinated anyone before and wasn't sure what to do. I wanted to confront Penny before I executed her, so I rolled the guy off her and onto the floor. The pellets had made a neat hole in his forehead, about 1 inch in diameter. Up until today, every dead person I had ever seen had been made up by an undertaker to look like they were sleeping. No lamp here looked very dead, and his would not be an open coffin wake. He hit the floor with a hard thud. That's when I saw his eyes. His eyes were still wide open, staring at me. I have to admit that I was a bit unnerved, so I pulled the blanket off the bed and threw it over the corpse. After a few minutes of waiting, I began to lose patience. I went to the bathroom and poured a glass of cold water, which I proceeded to throw in Penny's face. She sat up and shook her head, as if she was trying to see if it was all a bad dream. She knew it wasn't when she wiped her hand across her face. I saw a handful of lampier brains across her face. I could see and recognize the reality of her predicament by the pure terror in her eyes. She tried to scream, but fear wouldn't allow it to escape her. The only sound was her sucking for air like an asthmatic person fighting to take a breath. All too soon this was replaced by her wailing like a banshee. I was getting worried I might not have the nerve to shoot her. One thing is shooting a fat bastard in the back, but quite another is blowing away the woman I love. I mean, I'm an accountant, not a hitman. You know, I get annoyed when you cry. I'm telling you, stop it, it's not helping. I offered her a towel to wipe Lampier off her naked chest. She began to talk, but her mouth was quivering so badly I couldn't understand her. I told her to calm down and take a deep breath because after a couple of minutes, I could finally make out what she was saying. She asked if I remembered what I'd said if she had an affair. She nodded slowly. Then she asked if I had a reason not to kill her. She seemed confused, as if she was trying to remember the right words to get me to change my mind. Finally, she said, "No, I'll give you 7 minutes to find serenity with God because you've been my wife for 7 years. You have 7 minutes to find serenity with God because you've been my wife for 7 years. You should be aware that I will instantly kill you if you attempt to talk me out of it." Looking at my watch, I saw that I'd assumed Penny was praying as I could see her lips moving. Then she closed her eyes and let out a pitiful moan. 5 minutes later, she was silent. I thought about what I would do if I only had 4 minutes to live. I checked my watch. 3 minutes. Matt, I'm so scared. So are you. Tears were rolling down my cheeks. 2 minutes. Will it hurt much? I'll be over in an instant. You'll open your eyes in heaven. Penny began sobbing louder but finally managed to say, "Please shoot me in the chest instead of my face." I nodded and pointed the barrel of the gun at her heart. The distinctive metallic sound of me chambering. The sound of the 12 gauge echoing through the room was like a gunshot. "I love you. I love you too." I pulled the trigger and took my wife's life. The shotgun blew a hole in her chest as big as the hole she left in my heart. I sat down next to her and cried for at least an hour. Then I got out a legal pad and began writing my confession. I started by telling the story of the hole in the picture and ended with, "I am a man of my word." I kept my promise to my wife. I knew I only had enough food for a cup of coffee for the day when my stomach began to growl. I figured I would be lucky to have something to eat before tomorrow morning. Then I thought, why not call the police? When I got downstairs, I saw a menu for a nearby Italian restaurant. I figured that was the last pizza I would ever eat. I cracked open a beer. I figured this would be my last meal too, so I wrote a note to my brother while I waited. I told him how to dispose of my property, bank account information, etc. I put Penny's insurance policy, all of the cash I had on hand, and a set of keys in a priority mail envelope, sealed it, and then slapped the correct postage on it. 30 minutes later, the doorbell rang. I handed the delivery kid $25 and said, "Keep the change." I made his day. I wasn't going to be making any more. I wasn't sure if it was real or not, but I recalled that in almost every detective show they take away the bad guy's belt and shoelaces so he won't hang himself. I knew there would be TV cameras at court and didn't want to be walking around like I was moping. So I took what I expected to be my last hot shower, then changed into a pair of comfortable pants that didn't need a belt and a pair of loafers to make sure my story got out. I made copies of I wrote my confession and sent it to 2 reporters whose names I got off the front page of the local newspaper. I wanted to make sure everyone knew why I had to do it. I walked about half a mile to the drugstore and dropped the envelopes in the mailbox as I walked back. I realized I was taking my last walk as a free man. 10 minutes later, I took one last walk through our house, ending at the master bedroom. I kissed Penny one last time. I went downstairs to call the police. I put my signed confession on the floor next to the disassembled shotgun. 911, what is your emergency? My name is Matthew Weiss. I just shot my wife and her lover. I have your address as 2201 Morrison Street. Yes, ma'am. They're in the upstairs bedroom. The officers will find no resistance. The front door is wide open, and I'll be lying face down with my fingers laced behind my head. It took a couple of minutes for the first squad car to arrive. It took them almost as long to walk in and slap a pair of handcuffs on me. I was driven to the station in the back seat of an unmarked car. The following few days are quite hazy. I was constantly being hustled, so I was relieved that I had eaten. Before I handed myself in, I thought I'd mention that this was the first double homicide in the peaceful village where I live. Everyone seemed keen to speak with me, but I kept telling them I'd already explained everything in my confession. They still wanted to grill me, though. The detective interrogating me he asked if I ever considered killing myself. My answer was always the same: I only did what I gave my word to do. A man who doesn't keep his word is not a man. He got even more annoyed when I refused to tell him how I became aware my wife was having an affair, and more specifically when she would. He was having an affair with her. His fancy words didn't make me break my silence, as I was sworn to secrecy. I'm a man of my word. I couldn't tell how much time had passed because the room had no window or clock, just a metal table to which I was handcuffed and 2 chairs. I figured it was early evening when a state police investigator took over the questioning. He seemed like a nice enough guy. He even offered me a cup of coffee, but it tasted awful. I told him my story again, and he thanked me for my time and said he'd be back when it was time for me to go to court next. Then I was examined. I was asked by a psychiatrist if I felt remorse. I said no, I felt betrayed. I was betrayed by the woman who promised in front of God and man to forsake all others. I added that I had to do what I did or I would not be a man. He wasn't happy with my answers. We had a verbal back and forth. We went back and forth over my morals and ethics for about 2 hours before he said he had what he needed. I was shackled and led back to my cell to wait for my next inquisitor. The next morning, I was brought before a judge for arraignment after the indictment was read. The judge asked me how I pleaded guilty. My court-appointed attorney, who looked like he just graduated from law school, shouted, "No, Your Honor. My client doesn't." He was referring to the crime of passion, and he was pleading temporary insanity. I protested just as vigorously that I was not insane and knew what I was doing. I yelled, "Your Honor, can I please speak?" A loud roar came forth. From the crowd, I heard people shouting, "Let the murderer speak." Some people were even suggesting ways I should be put to death. One man in a bad suit pushed his way forward. Thompson from the Times asked, "Did you get your confession in the mail?" I replied, "Yes, my confession is real." A couple of Burley the sheriff's deputies quickly led me out of the courtroom. I never did find out what the judge's answer was. I ended up spending another lovely evening in the Gay Bar Hotel, complete with a room service meal after a dinner of a bologna sandwich, potato chips, and green beans. I sat in my bunk and stared at the wall until lights out. Matthew Weiss had a terrible experience that evening. He woke up unable to move. He thought he was dreaming but couldn't wake up. He started to feel anxious, even though the rest of his body was cool. He could feel his pillow was soaked in sweat. He tried to speak but couldn't. He was limited to merely when the jailer came in the morning to count prisoners. Matthew Weiss blinked his eyes. When the jailer ordered Weiss to get out of bed, he didn't. The jailer called for backup before unlocking the cell. It didn't take them long to determine that Matthew Weiss wasn't faking it. A paramedic showed up and carried him till he was taken to the county hospital in an ambulance with his right wrist handcuffed to the gurney. When he came to, he was in a bed with a web of wires and tubes hooked up to him. He overheard someone explaining that he had suffered a massive stroke, but it looked like he would live for 6 months. He was able to move his left arm enough to feed himself, but he never spoke again. The county doesn't have a lot of money on physical rehabilitation for people who have confessed to murder, so Matthew Weiss spent the rest of his life sitting in a wheelchair, staring at the wall. Some days, the minimum wage intern would turn on the TV, but I didn't matter to him because he lived in his mind, reliving his marriage, fast-forwarding through the bad times and dwelling on the good. He also had great philosophical debates about his final judgment. He was convinced he would be reunited with his wife. 10 years later, the angel of death collected the soul of Matthew Weiss, and he died. With a smile on her face, which was the first anyone could recall seeing, she also smiled when a reporter called to inform Mrs. Lampier that her husband's killer had passed away. She died with her secret, which is why she smiled. Nobody would ever discover that she was the one who took the phone call that forced Matthew to. Do you think he lived up to his promise? What's your opinion about OP? Thanks for joining us in our stories where revenge is served hot. Please consider subscribing to our channel to ensure your next chef remains loyal. Tune in for the next one to get your revenge appetite fulfilled. If you're below 18, hold on, it's not for the faint-hearted. I'm feeling pretty hardened at the moment.